You can't walk into an executive briefing dressed like you change tires for a living, Dylan Ridgeway said, looking down at my steel-toe boots like they were something he had scraped off the bottom of his shoe. It was 7:46 on a Monday morning, his first full day as Chief Operating Officer of Ridgeway Aeronautics, and I had been awake since 4 because one of our prototype cargo conversion aircraft had failed a vibration test before sunrise. I had come straight from the flight line to the conference room with grease on one sleeve, my hair pulled into a low knot, and a tablet full of numbers that could either save or kill a $2.4 billion fleet modernization agreement. Dylan had spent 20 minutes talking about repositioning the company's image before he noticed what I was wearing. I told him, "The Meridian team lands in 35 minutes. We found a harmonic problem in the left nacelle mount, and I need to finish the correction package before they get here." He leaned back in his father's old chair and smiled. That wasn't an answer. My older brother Ryan was sitting 3 seats down from him. Ryan had worked operations at Ridgeway for 6 years and had spent the previous month telling everyone our founder's son was going to bring a younger energy to the company. I looked at my brother, expecting at least a flicker of recognition, because Ryan knew exactly why I was wearing those boots. He had called me at 4:19 that morning when the test crew flagged the problem. He looked at the tabletop instead. Dylan slid a printed employee appearance policy across the table. Senior staff represents the brand. If you want to crawl under airplanes, work maintenance. If you want to sit with clients, dress like you belong in the room. I said, the client cares whether the airplane stays together at altitude. That did it. He stared at me for a moment and said, "Pack your desk. You're terminated effective immediately. No warning, no review. No call to legal." Just a man who had inherited authority deciding that my boots offended him more than a failed structural test concerned him. Ryan finally looked up. I waited for my brother to tell Dylan that I was the program integration lead, that my name appeared in the Meridian Master Agreement as designated key personnel, that I had spent 11 months coordinating engineering, certification, production, and customer acceptance. Instead, Ryan cleared his throat and said, "Maybe we should keep things calm. Dylan's setting a new standard." I remember that sentence more clearly than I remember being fired. Dylan's setting a new standard. My own brother had watched me work 80-hour weeks, miss Thanksgiving dinner because a supplier botched a control unit, and sleep on an airport bench in Tulsa after an emergency inspection, and in the moment it mattered, he chose the man who might promote him. I stood, picked up my tablet, and said, "You'll want legal to read Section 11.4 before Meridian gets here." Dylan waved toward the door. "Security can help you with your personal belongings." I walked out without raising my voice. I did not steal files, erase folders, or send a dramatic goodbye email. I returned the tablet because it belonged to Ridgeway, packed a coffee mug, 2 framed photos, and the little brass caliper my dad had given me when I graduated from Georgia Tech, then surrendered my badge at reception. I was halfway across the lobby when the front doors opened, and Carol Vance, Meridian Air Cargo's Executive Vice President of Fleet Operations, came in with her general counsel and 3 engineers. Carol was 61, 5'4", and had the kind of presence that made people stop pretending they knew what they were talking about. She saw the cardboard box in my arms, stopped walking, and said, "Mara, what happened?" Before I could answer, Dylan came out of the elevator with Ryan and 2 members of the executive team behind him. He had changed his expression completely. "Miss Vance, welcome to Ridgeway. I'm Dylan Ridgeway, our new COO. We're excited to move forward with the signing." Carol kept looking at me. "Mara," I said, "I was terminated about 12 minutes ago." The lobby went quiet. Carol turned to Dylan. "Terminated?" He gave a polished little laugh. "Internal restructuring. Nothing that affects the program. We have an excellent team ready to transition." Carol handed her leather folder to her lawyer. "Open the agreement," her counsel did. Carol said, "Section 11.4. Dylan's smile changed. Carol looked at him and said, "Mara Ellis is listed as designated key personnel and primary technical authority for the integration baseline. You can replace her, but not without written notice, our approval, and a transition review." You removed her 40 minutes before execution without telling us. Dylan started talking about management prerogative. Carol held up one hand. Your prerogative is your business. My $2.4 billion is mine. We are suspending execution pending technical and leadership review. Then she looked at me again. And before anybody says this is personal, it isn't. We signed onto this program because the system Mara built gave us confidence you could deliver. If your first leadership decision is to remove the person responsible for the baseline without even reading the contract, I need to know what else you haven't read. Ryan went pale. Dylan said, "We can resolve this upstairs." Carol answered, "Not today." She took the folder back, nodded to me, and walked straight out. I could hear Dylan call my brother's name before the doors closed behind her. I kept walking. Carol caught up with me in the parking garage 10 minutes later. I was putting my box into the trunk of my Honda when a black SUV stopped 2 spaces away and she stepped out. "Do you have another job?" she asked. I said, "As of 40 minutes ago, no." That answer was true at that moment, and I remember being almost relieved by the simplicity of it. No job, no company badge, no brother willing to stand beside me when it cost him something. Carol nodded. "Then listen before you make any decisions. Meridian is building an internal supplier reliability group in Dallas. We've had too many vendors tell us everything is fine until the airplane is already late. I need someone who understands the technical side and knows when an executive is selling me theater. I can't promise anything in a parking garage, and I won't turn your firing into some stunt. But I want you to interview this afternoon," I said. "Wouldn't that create a conflict on Ridgeway?" "Yes," she said, "which is why if we hire you, you will be recused from any decision involving them until council clears it. I'm offering you a career, Mara, not a weapon." That sentence mattered. I had enough anger in me to want a weapon. What she offered was better. At 2 that afternoon, I sat with Meridian's chief engineering officer, HR director, and general counsel. They asked real questions. They wanted to know how I had caught the nacelle problem, why our supplier audit had missed it, how I would redesign their escalation process, and what I believed Ridgeway's biggest weakness was. I did not say Dylan Ridgeway. I said, "They've built too much institutional knowledge around individual people instead of repeatable systems. That works until somebody with authority mistakes a person for a replaceable title." At 4:38, Meridian offered me Director of Supplier Systems Assurance at a salary 40% above what Ridgeway paid me, plus a signing bonus and equity. I read every page before I signed. I specifically asked counsel to add the Ridgeway recusal in writing. By 6, I had a new job, and nobody in my family knew. I did not hide it as some elaborate test. I simply did not have the energy to announce anything yet. My mother had already called 3 times. Ryan had texted twice. The first message said, "Dylan is furious. You need to call him and tell Meridian you overreacted." The second said, "Mom wants us all at dinner tonight. Please don't make this worse." I almost went home instead, but my mother's house was 40 minutes from Dallas in a suburb where every lawn looked like it had been measured with a ruler. After Dad died 3 years earlier, Mom had struggled with the mortgage and taxes, so I had agreed to send her $1,800 a month while she reorganized her finances. It was supposed to last 1 year. Then Ryan's wife had a difficult pregnancy. Then their daughter started needing speech therapy. Then Mom's property tax jumped. And every time I tried to end the arrangement, there was another reason. It was just not the right month. I had kept paying because I could. That was the truth I had never wanted to examine too closely. I could. So everyone had decided I should. When I walked into Mom's dining room that night, Ryan was already there with his wife, Beth, and my mother had set out Dad's old good plates, which meant she wanted the evening to feel serious. Mom hugged me quickly, then stepped back and said, "You look exhausted." I said, "I got fired this morning." She nodded. Ryan told me, "Honey, I think you need to fix this before pride makes it permanent." I stared at her. "That's the first thing you want to say?" Beth looked uncomfortable. Ryan said, "Mara, nobody is saying Dylan handled it perfectly. He fired me over work boots after I spent 4 hours on his flight line." Ryan rubbed his face. "I know, but Meridian freezing the agreement puts hundreds of jobs at risk. I'm probably getting vice president of operations if this closes. We all have something riding on it. I had something riding on it too, I said. My job. Mom sighed like I was being difficult. And you can get it back. I looked from her to Ryan. Why would I want it back? Ryan's expression changed. Because this isn't just about you. That was when I understood the meeting had never been about making sure I was okay. Mom reached across the table and touched my wrist. Mara, your brother has a wife and a little girl. He can't afford for this company to fall apart because you and Dylan had a personality conflict. I pulled my hand back. He fired me. Ryan sat in the room and supported it. Ryan said, I didn't support it. I looked directly at him. You said he was setting a new standard. What did you want me to do? Blow up my career in front of the COO? No. I wanted my brother to tell the truth. He looked away, and Mom jumped in before the silence could settle. Fine. Everybody made mistakes. Call Miss Vance tomorrow, say emotions were high, and tell her you're willing to come back. I almost laughed. You think I can just call a customer and order them to release $2.4 billion? Mom's face hardened. Don't be sarcastic with me. I'm not. I'm asking if you actually understand what happened. Ryan leaned forward. You have influence with Carol. Use it. Dylan will probably reinstate you if you make this go away. I can smooth things out afterward. You mean after your promotion? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Then my mother said something that changed the whole night. Ryan needs that promotion, Mara, especially now with the refinance. I looked at her. What refinance? Ryan went still. Beth whispered. Ryan. Mom realized too late that I did not know. I set my fork down. What refinance? She glanced at my brother and then said, We had to free up some equity. We? The house needed work and Ryan had an opportunity. My stomach tightened. What opportunity? Ryan said. It's not a big deal. That phrase has never once preceded anything good. After 5 minutes of pushing, the truth came out. 6 months earlier, Mom had taken a $160,000 home equity loan against the house. She had given most of it to Ryan to buy into a small aircraft parts brokerage started by one of his friends. Ryan expected his new Ridgeway title to bring connections and supplier access that would make the business take off. My monthly $1,800, which I thought was helping Mom stay comfortable after Dad's death, had been covering almost all of the increased loan payment. They had built a new financial arrangement around money I had never promised indefinitely. I asked, When were you planning to tell me? Mom said, once the business was stable. And if it wasn't? Ryan snapped. It will be, if this Meridian agreement closes. There it was. My firing, his promotion, Mom's house, the side business, all of it connected by one assumption. Mara will keep the machine running. I sat back and felt something inside me go quiet. Not angry, quiet, I said. My automatic payments stop at the end of this month. Mom's mouth fell open. You cannot do that. I can. The original arrangement was 12 months. I've paid for 32. Ryan pushed his chair back. So you're punishing Mom because you're mad at me? No. I'm ending a payment I was never asked to consent to under the new loan. Mom's eyes filled instantly. After everything we did for you? I looked around the table at the people who had spent the evening telling me to beg for the job I had lost so their plans would survive. Dad helped me through college. You loved me. I love you. None of that creates a lifetime subscription to my checking account. Ryan stood up. You've always been selfish when people don't do exactly what you want. I stood too. I was fired at 7:46 this morning. By 5 o'clock, I had accepted a new position with Meridian. The room froze. Ryan stared at me. What? Mom said, "You already have another job?" Yes. Then why didn't you say that when you walked in? Because I wanted to tell my family I had been fired before I told them what happened next. I thought maybe somebody would ask if I was okay. Nobody said anything. I picked up my purse. Ryan recovered first. If you work for Meridian, this is even easier. You can fix the contract from inside. I looked at him. I'm legally recused from Ridgeway matters. Then unrecuse yourself. That is not how ethics works. He laughed bitterly. So you get your nice new job and the rest of us just take the hit? I said, No, Ryan. The rest of you live with the decisions you made. Then I kissed Mom on the cheek, told Beth I hoped my niece's therapy was going well, and left before anybody could turn my new job into another family resource. The first 3 months at Meridian were the busiest and cleanest months of my adult life. Clean did not mean easy. It meant every problem belonged to the person whose name was attached to it. Nobody called me at midnight because my brother had spent money he did not have. Nobody expected me to edit a presentation for someone who wanted credit the next morning. Nobody promoted me because a customer liked me, and nobody protected me because Carol did. I had to earn every inch. My team reviewed suppliers across 5 states, and I spent more time in composite shops and maintenance hangars than in conference rooms. I bought better steel-toe boots. The Ridgeway matter stayed outside my lane. Meridian assigned it to another director, Paul Chen, and counsel copied me only on notices that affected the technical records I had authored. I learned from those notices that the frozen agreement had not been canceled immediately. Meridian gave Ridgeway 60 days to present a recovery plan, nominate new key personnel, complete an independent configuration audit, and demonstrate that the vibration issue had been corrected. That was fair. It also gave Dylan every opportunity to prove that the company was bigger than me, which, despite everything, I hoped was true. Hundreds of good people worked there. I did not want machinists, inspectors, schedulers, or engineers losing jobs because one executive had humiliated me. The problem was that Dylan treated the review as a public relations crisis instead of an engineering crisis. He hired a consulting firm to redesign Ridgeway's brand presentation. He replaced 2 veteran managers with younger directors who had never delivered an aircraft program. Ryan got his promotion to Vice President of Operations, exactly as he had expected, but with the title came responsibility he had never actually carried. 2 weeks later, an internal quality auditor discovered that Ryan's team had closed several supplier corrective actions without complete test evidence, so the production schedule would look better for Meridian. I know that because federal rules required the records to be disclosed once Ridgeway included them in a certification package. I did not investigate my brother. I did not report him. I did not need to. Paper has a strange loyalty to the truth. On day 58, Meridian's independent reviewers found another issue. The replacement lead had signed a configuration summary based on an obsolete revision. No one was hurt. No aircraft had entered service. But trust was gone. Meridian canceled the fleet agreement for cause 2 days before Ridgeway's cure period expired. Carol called me into her office afterward and said, "I wanted you to hear it from me before somebody turns this into a story about you." I asked, "Was my old work part of the reason?" "Your old work gave them a path to recover," she said. "Their new leadership chose not to follow it. That distinction gave me more peace than revenge ever could. Ridgeway had not failed because I attacked it. It had been given a road back, and the people in charge had driven off the side. I went home that night, made pasta, and did not celebrate. The next morning, Ryan called at 6:12. It was the first time we had spoken since Mom's dinner. "Did you know they were going to cancel?" he demanded. I said, "No, I'm recused." "That's convenient. It's documented. They're laying off people, Mara." "I'm sorry. Don't say that like you're some stranger." I closed my eyes. "What do you want me to say? Call Carol." "No. You haven't even heard what I'm asking. You're asking me to use a professional relationship to reverse a decision I was intentionally excluded from." He went silent, then said, "Mom's loan payment jumped again. My brokerage isn't moving. I need time. There was no apology for that morning at Ridgeway. No acknowledgement of the dinner. Just need. I said, talk to the bank. Sell your share in the brokerage if you can. Cut expenses. You sound like a financial pamphlet. Because the other answer is no. He hung up. 2 days later, Mom called crying. Ryan had been laid off with most of Ridgeway's executive expansion team. She said, your brother has a child. I said, I know. She said, he made a mistake. I said, he made several. Then she asked me to restart the $1,800. I offered instead to sit down with her and a nonprofit housing counselor, review the loan, sell the second car, and create a realistic budget. She said, I don't need a counselor. I need my daughter. I answered, you have your daughter. You don't have her automatic payment. She hung up too. By spring, Ridgeway Aeronautics had not disappeared. Reality was less cinematic than that. The company sold one division, replaced Dylan as COO, and entered a restructuring supervised by its lenders. Most of the production workers kept their jobs under a smaller defense maintenance contract. That mattered to me. I did not need the building empty to feel vindicated. Ryan's brokerage, however, collapsed after his partner admitted they had used projected Ridgeway contacts to justify inventory purchases nobody had committed to buy. Ryan was not charged with anything, but he lost nearly all the money Mom had lent him. Mom finally agreed to meet the housing counselor after the bank denied her request for another extension. The numbers were ugly but not hopeless. If she sold the house before falling further behind, paid off the equity loan, and moved into a smaller condo, she could keep most of what Dad had spent his life building. She hated the idea because the house represented success to her. I understood that. I also understood I could not keep financing a symbol. Then, one Friday afternoon, 6 months after the firing, Ryan showed up in the lobby of Meridian's Dallas office without an appointment. Security called me downstairs because he was family. When the elevator opened, I barely recognized him. No Ridgeway badge, no tailored Navy suit, no executive confidence, just jeans, a checked shirt, and the exhausted face of my brother. We sat in a corner of the cafeteria. He didn't ask for money immediately, which I appreciated. He said, Mom accepted an offer on the house. I nodded. She told me. She blames me. She's allowed to be angry. He rubbed both hands over his face. Beth does too. I waited. Finally, he said, I have an interview Monday with a supplier in Wichita, operations manager, not vice president. That sounds like a real job. He gave me a humorless smile. You always hated titles. I hate titles when people use them instead of competence. He nodded, because this time he knew exactly what I meant. Then he said, I came here to ask you for one thing. I felt my shoulders tighten. What? Not a job. Not money. He looked straight at me. Tell me what I did wrong that morning. Of all the things he could have asked, that was the one I had not prepared for. I said, you want the professional answer or the sister answer? Both. I leaned back. Professionally, you watched an executive make an irreversible personnel decision without understanding the contract, the technical issue, or the customer risk. You knew facts he didn't know, and you kept quiet because you thought silence would help your promotion. That isn't leadership. It's career gambling. Ryan swallowed. And as my brother, I looked down at my hands. You didn't have to quit for me. You didn't have to start a fight. You could have said one sentence. Dylan, before you do this, read section 11.4 and understand why she's dressed like that. One sentence. You knew I had been on the flight line since 4. You knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but you saw a choice between truth and access, and you picked access. He stared at the table for a long time. I thought if I got high enough, I could take care of everybody. You were already surrounded by people taking care of you. His eyes watered, and he looked away. I'm sorry, Mara. It was the first apology he had given me without attaching a request to it. I believed he meant it. Believing him did not erase anything. It just meant we had something honest to build from. I said, I accept the apology. His shoulders dropped. Then he asked, will you be a reference for Wichita? I considered it carefully. I'll tell them the truth. You understand operations. You know the floor. You work hard when you stop worrying about being seen working hard. And you made a major judgment error at Ridgeway that I hope you learned from." He let out a short laugh. "That is brutally specific. That's the reference I can give. I'll take it." Before he left, he said, "Mom still thinks you could have saved the house." I looked through the glass wall toward the runway beyond our building. I could have made payments. That isn't the same as saving it. The following Monday marked exactly 7 months since Dylan Ridgeway had fired me for wearing the wrong shoes. I was back on a flight line before sunrise, standing beneath the wing of Meridian's first aircraft to complete a supplier reliability program my new team had built from scratch. Carol walked up beside me carrying 2 coffees and looked at my boots. "Those new?" she asked. I said, "Same kind, better insoles." She handed me a cup. "Board presentation at 9. You planning to change?" I looked down at the dust on my jeans. "Eventually." She smiled. "Take your time. I hired you because you know where the work happens." At 9, I presented 20 minutes of test results to the board without a single adjective about excellence, transformation, or vision. I showed them what had failed, what we changed, what it cost, and what risk remained. When I finished, the chief financial officer asked how I had cut supplier escape defects by nearly a third in 6 months. I said, "We stopped punishing people for bringing us bad news early." That was the whole lesson, really. Ridgeway had punished me for arriving with bad news in work boots. My family had punished me for refusing to keep bad decisions comfortable. I had spent years believing usefulness was the price of belonging, so I made myself useful everywhere. At work, at Mom's house, in Ryan's emergencies, in every problem anybody laid in front of me. Then one morning I lost a job and discovered how quickly some people changed when they thought the usefulness was gone. What surprised me was that losing those arrangements did not empty my life. It made room in it. Mom moved into a 2-bedroom condo 10 minutes from Beth and my niece. She complained for the first month, then discovered she liked not worrying about a roof, a yard, or a giant tax bill. Ryan got the Wichita job. He took a pay cut, rented a small apartment during the week, and drove home every Friday. He stopped calling me to solve things. Sometimes he called just to talk. Beth sent me a picture of my niece holding a science fair ribbon and wrote, "She says Aunt Mara is the engineer in the family." I saved that one. As for Dylan Ridgeway, I never spoke to him again. I heard he joined a branding consultancy in California. Maybe he got better at reading contracts. Maybe he didn't. It was no longer my problem. The people who had expected me to rescue them eventually learned something I had needed to learn too. Being related to me did not give them ownership of my labor, my reputation, or my money. Loving somebody could mean helping them. It could also mean refusing to make the same rescue twice. And if I ever doubted that, I remembered that Monday morning and the sound of Carol Vance closing a $2.4 billion contract folder because one arrogant man had confused authority with value. He thought firing me would prove I was replaceable. What happened next proved something different. I had never needed to destroy anyone. I only had to stop standing underneath the things they kept dropping and calling it support.